Protect yourself from the novel coronavirus. Wash your hands thoroughly and frequently for at least 20 seconds each time. Avoid shaking hands and touching your face with unclean hands. If you have to cough or sneeze, do so into your flexed elbow or a paper towel and then dispose of it. Keep a distance of 3 feet away from anyone with a cold or flu-like symptoms. Boost your immune system with vitamins, drink plenty of water, and get adequate rest. Visit your doctor, the nearest hospital, or health center if you or a family member becomes ill. A message from the Ministry of Health and the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA.
ECCB Digital Dialogues.
Pleasant good afternoon, teacher, and everyone logged on to WINN FM 98.9.
Specially
We're
designed
going to break
for
from our
you
regular programming to
as
join
we navigate this
another
pandemic
edition,
together.
a delay broadcast
Today,
of the ECCB.
we are doing our
Digital
11th
Dialogue.
edition. And our focus and topic today is Pandemic and Digital Transformation Part 2. I think we can all readily agree that connectivity and digital tools have been a lifeline in this pandemic. And I want to seize this opportunity at the jump to commend our telecom operators who have worked very hard to keep us connected in this period. It has not been easy. If you think about it, we are now relying on these digital tools for learning, for work, worship, shopping, socializing, among many other things. They have been a lifeline. But the pandemic has also exposed the digital divide, the connected and the unconnected. And we are only painfully aware of the difficulties that that has presented for some of our people, including folks who are unable to have access to sustain their education, among other things. According to a World Bank estimate, about 40% of our population do not have connectivity. But the reality is that even for those of us who do, the cost is high. According to the World Bank, it's among the highest in the Western Hemisphere. So there are positives, but there are also challenges. And I think we want to explore some of that today. In a previous version, in fact, the first part of this topic on digital transformation, we did a poll. And the poll actually, we did two things that came out of that poll. One is that 40% of the persons polled felt that our most pressing issue is, in fact, connectivity. Interesting. 55% of those polled said they wanted to see government offer more by way of or use of digital technologies. So there are some clear messages already emanating from our people, from our citizenry, in respect of this issue of digital transformation. And make no mistake about it, in this period, as we work towards building resilience and a post-pandemic world, digital transformation is essential. It is critical. And therefore, it is right and proper that we spend time today to consider these matters. And I'm very pleased to have with us in a distinguished panel, which I will introduce to you shortly. So we want to explore several issues during the course of this dialogue. For example, how can we quickly boost connectivity in our region? What will that take? Make no mistake about it. How can the public and private sectors work together to deliver on the promise of digital transformation for our region? Digital transformation is essential. And what about our youth? It is critical. What are the opportunities and therefore it is right emerging in the digital economy for our today youth? To consider these matters. These questions and more we will explore over the next 90 minutes. And so, before I come to the panel, a few housekeeping announcements. This dialogue is being streamed live on our ECCB Connects Facebook page. Attendees in the Zoom room will have their microphones muted throughout the dialogue, just to ensure a good quality. Attendees in the Zoom room are invited to submit their comments in the chat box and your questions in the Q&A box. So let's remember that. Comments in the chat box, questions in the Q&A box. We will receive those questions, and as a moderator, I will field those questions or share the questions with the panel and invite them to comment. One of our colleagues is actually monitoring our Facebook page and will submit or forward the questions from the Facebook page into the Q&A box so that we can also hear from and respond to our Facebook viewers. As always, we welcome and encourage a respectful dialogue. We want you to fully participate, but to do so respectfully. So, of course, no offensive language, please. The recording of this dialogue will, in fact, be on our ECCB Connects Facebook page and on our YouTube channel, also called ECCB Connects. And so it will be available for you to view after this event. If we have any technical difficulties, we will simply ask that you reconnect to the dialogue using the link that has been provided and which you've used to join us today. We're going to do something a little different today than we've done in the previous 10 editions. We will be opening the audience poll from now to allow you to express your vote, express your views, and therefore I need to tell you how you can do that. You will go to www.menti.com. I repeat, www.menti.com. The code today is 6781897. I repeat, www.menti.com, and the code today is 6781897. Once you enter the code, the questions will appear. And so we've done this to allow you to start voting immediately. If you have to leave early, please express your vote or exercise before you leave. And of course, if you join in later in the broadcast, you will have an opportunity to do that. But we'll also leave it open after this broadcast so that persons who view the event later will also have a chance to weigh in with their views. So again, as you can see, we've catered for everyone. The early ones, those who will leave early, those who will arrive late, and those who will view later. Again, I want to recognize the fact that we are working with several partner radio stations across our currency union, and we will share the names of our partners with you as we go along. So again, this morning, I welcome all of you to ECCB Digital Dialogues. Our topic today, Pandemic and Digital Transformation, Part 2. Now to the introduction of our panel. First up, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Akila Byron Nisbet, who is the Minister for ICT in the Federation of St Kitts and Nevis. But that's our principal focus today. I could also tell you she's Minister for Health, so you could well imagine that our hands are full at this time. So we're very, very grateful that she's agreed to come on to talk to us on this very important issue of digital transformation, an issue for which she's very passionate, as you will hear and you will see. Now, Minister is trained in ICT, but the most, and of course, she's a former Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. She's now an elected member of the House. But I will tell you the favorite part of this introduction for me is the fact that she's an ECCB alumnus. We're very, very proud of our minister because we now feel that we have an advocate and a champion in the high halls of government and state to advance this issue of digital transformation. You will see her bio. I won't go into all of the details, but we're just very, very pleased to have you. So, Madam Minister, welcome.
Thank you so much, Governor, and it is indeed a pleasure to be here with you today.
Wow.
And to be part of this dialogue.
The background that you have there. It piques my interest and curiosity. Right. Now, I'd like to introduce Mr. David Cox. Mr. David Cox is a lawyer by training. He heads the regulatory affairs for cable and wireless in the Caribbean. and he's also now the chairman of CANTO, a very important voice for public advocacy on all matters ICT. Mr. Cox, David.
Hi, Governor. Hello to your audience. Hello, Minister, and fellow panelists, Ms. Powell. It's a pleasure to be on with all of you, and I look forward to a really interesting and engaging discussion.
Thank you very much. And last but by no means least, and I'm not sure who is the youngest between the Minister and Ms. Powell. I would not go into that right now, except we have another very eminent panelist in Ms. Kirsty Powell. She is, in fact, technical advisor in the Office of the Prime Minister for the government of the Bahamas. Ms. Powell is actually a trained electrical engineer. She's worked with Google as a senior technician. She's also worked with Goldman Sachs in the technology division. I have to tell you, I first met Ms. Powell, I think 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if you recall, in the Bahamas at the Caribbean Association of Banks conference, where you did a keynote, and it was just wonderful. And I was just so impressed to see a young person, young lady, so passionate as well about these issues. And so we are very pleased that you're able to join us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
For those of you who are new, or for those of you who are coming back but need a refresher, we do this dialogue in 3 segments. The first segment is the moderator will pose some questions to the panel directly and invite their responses. The second segment, which is a short but very important segment, is the poll. Now, because we've opened the poll from the start, after the first segment, we're going to check in to see how the poll is going. We're going to give you an early read and of course, see how people feel about the issues. And then the third and final segment is the Q&A segment, where we are going to field questions from the Q&A box and from our viewers on Facebook. So that's our lineup. The 90 minutes goes very, very quickly, as we've experienced. So without any further ado, let us start the questions. So I'm going to start with the Minister, Minister Byron Nisbet. And you know, you understand very well the issue of digital transformation. And of course, it's important for recovery, which is where we are now, but also for building resilience and for ultimate transformation of our region. Recovery, resilience, and transformation. So, Minister, I want to start with you and ask you, how has your government responded? With respect to digital tools and access specifically, what support has the government of St Kitts and Nevis provided? And secondly, what lessons have you gleaned about the state of readiness for a digital future?
Thank you very much, Governor, for that question. And again, it is my privilege to be a part of this dialogue this morning and discussing such an important topic on pandemic and digital transformation. As we are all aware, the pandemic has certainly fast-tracked our initiatives to move towards digital transformation and a digital economy. And one of the biggest concerns is that those countries who do not do it quickly enough would be left behind, because as we see, the world is moving more towards digital economies. And so we would have to make sure we put every effort behind making sure that the Caribbean in particular and the countries within our region and space are at that place where they are ready to continue to move forward and be resilient and be able to move with the rest of the world as we now engage more in a digital economy. In terms of St Kitts and Nevis, we would have been on this quest starting in 2019 when the government initiated the idea of us being able to become a fully digital economy. And so since 2019, we have been putting certain steps in place to ensure that we are able to reach that milestone of being able to say that St Kitts and Nevis is a full digitally transformed country and a digital economy. Unfortunately, COVID happened, and some of the efforts that we have been putting in towards that transformation got slowed a bit. It didn't stop, but it got slowed a bit. However, we would have already instituted tools that we thought would be important for enhancing the work that is done within the government in particular. And those are basic tools such as the means of communicating using Microsoft Teams so that persons in different departments and ministries had a more effective and efficient way to be able to communicate, to be able to share information digitally. And we were at that point where we're trying to engage all of the ministries and departments and getting them understanding the tools that are available to them. And of course, COVID happened and we kind of pushed them into the use of these tools. Because as you would imagine, persons were a bit hesitant in using these new forms of communication and new ways in which they would be able to sharing their information. But more specifically, once COVID came into being and we had to deal with it more quickly, let us look at education in particular. Now, all of our schools had to close down, but we also note that many of our students may not have the devices necessary for them to be able to connect electronically and be able to continue on that path with school, because school now moved over into it. So what the government did is that just before we had to completely close the schools down, we did a short survey to find out the households without devices, that is any type of laptop or tablets, as well as those without internet connection. And then the government decided that we had to do something because we couldn't afford to have any of our children left behind. And so a lot of the focus was making sure that the students and children have everything they need to be able to learn in a virtual environment. And so from the survey, we were able to supply at least 400 homes with laptop computers. Not 400, sorry, 1,900 students were given laptop computers. 400 teachers were provided with devices as well. And we made sure that around 700 homes were equipped with free internet that was a complimentary from the government of St Kitts and Nevis, because we did not want to have any of our students left behind. So that's just an idea. Outside of that, the government also offered concessions specifically to students and teachers so that they were able to order laptops or other devices and have concessions on those. So it would not be too expensive for them to be able to connect and have the devices necessary now that we are forcing them or moving them into a virtual platform. We didn't know how long it would last. And so we just had to make sure that those things were in place. So even if it was a long haul, at least we know our students were ready for that virtual environment, our teachers were ready for that virtual environment, and everybody who had an equal chance of being able to be part of that virtual environment. So those are just some of the things that we did leading up to the closing of our schools or borders because of COVID-19. But our digital transformation had already begun, and we continue on that quest towards ensuring that we build up. But we can talk more about that as we go along.
Right. Thank you, Minister, for that overview of what you have done and are doing. And of course, we're pleased to say that the children are back in school, but the tools are still in their hands. And I hope that it's a blended approach to learning. In other words, I hope they're using the tools still. Can you confirm that, Minister?
Yes, I can confirm that the students still do have access to those tools, and the teachers are now beginning to incorporate more virtual learning into the curriculum so that should anything happen again, at least the students are well equipped and prepared to work within that virtual environment.
Right. And that's what we mean, an example of resilience. If there has to be a shutdown for whatever reason, children should still be able to continue their education. And those tools are important for that. Very good. Thank you, Minister. I want to pose the same question to Ms. Powell. Kirsty, what lessons have you learned in the Bohemian context about the state of readiness for the digital future?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the question. I think just like the minister mentioned, as it relates to education, that was obviously one of the big ones for the Bahamas government as well. And out of that, what we actually realized is not just bridging the digital divide and ensuring that the students themselves had access to the tools that they needed and the infrastructure that they needed, but it also posed the question as to whether or not the government actually had the infrastructure that it needed to power the virtual environments for education. And so a lot of the telecom providers stepped in to ensure that we had the necessary compute as well as networking resources to provide a sustainable environment for them. Other things that I think we've learned in the Bahamas is that the public servant workforce suffered tremendously because governments predominantly are just not a big fan of working from home. And as a result of that, that slowed down agencies being able to deliver services to the citizens during the pandemic. And so now, as a result of that, we have long lines because of a backlog of being able to meet the demands. And so we quickly had to shift our mindsets from how do we bring government online to how do we actually make an online government to ensure that we can continue to provide services to the people. The other thing I think we learned a lot of is because the Bahamas is an archipelago of islands, obviously we have to service from the most northerly island to Grand Bahama to the most southerly island in Maguana. How do we deliver services, not just from a technology standpoint, but also logistics? How do we ensure that we can continue to do that? And so most recently, we've actually launched an interoperability platform focused on birth and civil registry, but also providing services like passports and driver's licenses to the citizens electronically. And then the last thing I would think that I would talk about that we actually did was we focused a lot on the small, medium-sized business market, because obviously small business owners are the backbone of the economy for most countries, or if not all of the countries. And so there are a lot of grants now that we've put in place to help those small businesses who want to move from a traditional brick and mortar store, but helping them move online so that they can accept e-commerce payments and that they have a website and a storefront. So I think a lot of businesses now as well are starting to think through how they can actually take advantage of the fact that the pandemic happened, but how they can use it to fuel and grow their businesses, as opposed to traditionally what I've said that they would have viewed technology as a cost center. Now they actually view it as a driver to their business.
Right, very good. And of course, the ECCU shares with the Bahamas the fact that we're also an archipelago of sorts. And within our currency union, we have countries with multiple islands. And so your experiences are very resonate with us in terms of the logistics and so on. Very good. So let me now turn to Mr. Cox. So David, and I want to ask you, tell us about the role of the telecoms industry in dealing with this massive surge in demand for connectivity, one. And secondly, what are some of the challenges with delivering on this demand? And how can we resolve those?
Well, Governor, first of all, thank you again. It's a real pleasure to speak with you, although I have to confess you have not done me a favor by putting me last after such dynamic and amazing leaders in the ICT space, but I'll do the best I can. I think the story of 2020 and into 2021, or as some call it 2020 2.0, is, for the telecoms industry at least, a story of some remarkable successes and some pain. Mm-hmm. The successes I speak of are that when the pandemic really hit the region, it became obvious overnight that the demand for connectivity would be unprecedented. Mm-hmm. The shift in demand in some cases from 1 week to another in March was as much as 40% and 50% in other cases across the region. So specifically you saw that people were online, they were consuming a certain amount of bandwidth 1 week. And then when country after country started closing borders, initiating shutdowns, initiating curfews, that demand for broadband connectivity spiked, sometimes 50%. What was interesting, and what I think the region has not taken enough notice of, is that by and large, and of course there are always exceptions, but by and large, the networks that we have in the region were able to sustain that increase in demand. Across the region, from Jamaica down to Curacao, country after country was able to boast networks that were resilient enough to accommodate the increased need for working from home, the increased need for online schooling, the incredible demand in the area of entertainment. People were home longer hours. They wanted entertainment. They were consuming more media than ever before in our region. And that increase in demand has basically been the same since March 2020, and we have not seen, frankly, a leveling off. It continues to increase. So I think the first point I want to stress is that our networks are actually in the region far more resilient than we realize. They are actually able to meet our citizens' needs, at least insofar as those people who have connectivity. And I think that is something that we need to be thankful for. We need to take note of. It is important because often there is a narrative that the networks in the Caribbean are somehow substandard or are somehow less than world class, and that isn't true. But I did speak of the painful lessons, and the painful lessons were that, of course, as you well said and put so eloquently, the situation did expose the divide between the haves and the have-nots. It exposed the divide between the urban centers and rural and poor communities. It exposed the divide between children who came from affluent households, who had multiple devices in their hands available to them to go online, to interact with their teachers and their classmates, and those students who lived in communities who were disadvantaged, disenfranchised, whose families perhaps either couldn't afford or were not interested in having a broadband connection. And that lesson was very painful. And so we've seen across the region that there are pockets, there are sections of our communities where, for a range of reasons, people didn't have connectivity. And that was very difficult for government, particularly because of the impact on students. The telecoms operators have tried to meet the gaps and have done a number of things in order to support our communities during this time. And it would be impossible for me to go through all of them, but I just want to quickly list a few of those things that we were trying to do. First thing we tried to do was just to make sure people remain connected. So for a period of time, a number of telecoms operators across the region, not just in the Eastern Caribbean, but across the region, we just weren't disconnecting customers if they couldn't pay. So for a period of time, customers were allowed to just stay on the network. And for periods of time after they were given an amnesty for payment, we continued to provide connectivity, albeit at lower levels, so that people could just have some connection while the pandemic was raging and while the lockdowns were affecting their ability to pay. In the aftermath of the economic impact, where so many people have been out of work, we've also developed a range of services, again, that give people minimum connections, that allow them to use services, etc., but which do not require them to continue to have to pay the same sums of money that they previously did. And there were other things that we were doing, which I'm happy to discuss with you and your audience, in the course of the conversation. But I think the bottom line is that we have experienced sort of the best of what the industry can offer, but we also need to reckon with these very painful gaps that we see in our rural and poor communities. And we need to work with government very, very firmly across the region in order to try to fill those gaps as quickly and as reasonably as possible.
Right. So, David, thank you. And I'm going to stay with you for a moment longer because, again, kudos to the telecoms operators. No doubt you have really performed in a difficult period. But customers will also say that we have, some of us, experienced reliability issues, drops, interruptions. We've not always received the speeds promised or advertised or paid for. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. And some of it's clearly infrastructure. We are well aware that not every community has fiber. There's copper and in some cases coaxial cable. So speak to this question of infrastructure. How do we begin to address that to be able to give the connectivity, which, frankly speaking, now has to be seen almost as a human right? I say almost, and my critics will say you need to say a human right. because it is that fundamental to citizenship in the digital economy, in the global economy. Speak to this issue of infrastructural challenges and how we might be able to overcome those things.
Okay, so the issue is complex. And the first thing I would say is that we need to have a recognition that the problems that we face are not solely dependent on the private sector. The problems that we face of connectivity in the region really have to do with, on the one hand, government policy, and in some cases bureaucracy, and in some cases the policies that governments pursue in terms of taxes, in terms of regulation, in terms of their treatment of the industry versus the outcomes that they're trying to achieve. On the other hand, the private sector needs to work harder to find a way to engage government, to identify the gaps, to develop plans that are shared. There's a consensus around investment, and the private sector does need to make a commitment to focus the resources that are necessary to address those gaps in infrastructure. I will say, though, that there are a number of complex issues that we don't address in the region that impact infrastructure, and we need to look at it in a comprehensive way. Some of the issues that are impacting the private sector's ability to invest, for example, and this is not an attack on the government. We live in a developing region. We live in a region in economies that are highly dependent on taxes to pay debt, to service high levels of debt, etc. We all understand the realities. But there are sectors, for example, that governments across the region recognize are important for their growth. And governments then implement policies in the hotel and tourism sector to encourage investment. So in the country where I live, where I'm talking to you from now, the government every year forgoes huge amounts of revenue. And again, this is not an attack, it's just a statement of fact. Government forgoes huge amounts of revenues to encourage investment by hotel and tourism associations and hoteliers. In the same way, if we recognize in the region that investment in infrastructure is important, we need to develop the fiscal and tax policies that encourage investment. So taxation on the industry is extremely high. The industry is among one of the most highly taxed in the region, and we need to bear in mind that the higher those taxes are, the less money these private companies have to invest in infrastructure. However, there are some very promising very promising things. Although the entire telecoms industry across the region has been hit hard by the pandemic, we are seeing expedited investments in fiber to the home. In Dominica, just this year alone, we will see a build of nearly 7,000, more like 8,000 homes will be passed with fiber to the home. In St Kitts, we're investing in fiber to the home. And throughout the region, companies are continuing to invest in fiber. So there is a challenge with infrastructure. And I think one of the things that we can recognize is that if we adopt the right policies in terms of trying to incentivize investment, and we also approach the issue as a partnership. You mentioned that it is, frankly, a human right. I would put it to you that in recognition of that fact, that means that the responsibility is both public and private sector, and that both parties need to work together. But I think that we can, there are some specific strategies that we can use to attack the infrastructure problem. And one of those I'd like to mention is the use of universal service funds. Government can subsidize rollouts in networks in areas that are underserved. They don't need to pay the whole. They don't need to pay the whole way. They can make a contribution and thereby reduce the cost for the private operator to invest in an area where there just aren't sufficient homes to make that investment economical. Governor, at the end of the day, what we're really talking about is about capital. What are the policies that we need as a region to develop in order to encourage the movement of capital into areas that will allow, into areas that traditionally would not allow a return on that capital? And that's the problem we need to crack. And we're not thinking about it in the right way at the policy level.
Right. So thank you, David. And I could feel your passion about that issue. And I might come back to that, but you've clearly flagged, if it is a human right, and let's not say if, let us now agree that connectivity now has to be regarded as a human right you've posited that it has to be a public-private partnership. And I think we can agree on that. And then the question becomes, what are our relative roles or contributions to deliver that partnership, to deliver the outcome that we want, which is high-speed broadband connectivity and affordable, and of course reliable. But we'll get back to that a little bit more, I hope, because I'm going to ask you, if there are three things, you mentioned taxation, but if there are three things, and the minister is also listening, she is a policymaker, if there are three things that you would ask of government as we reshape, we reimagine, and we reinvent, and we really deploy this public-private partnership, what will those be? But I'll come back to you. I'll give you a moment to just reflect on that, and we'll get back eventually. Minister, big picture question. What is your vision for digital transformation? And while you're responding to that, help me understand this wonderful background that you have there. I've been looking at it and trying to figure it out. So when you respond, also speak to that background and what that represents. Please.
Thank you so much, Governor. Let me start with the background. Well, I'm taking today's dialogue from our National ICT Center. In particular, I'm in what we dub as our innovation hub. So that's where we try to encourage young persons in particular who have innovative ideas, whether it is in robotics or drone or gaming. We create a space that encourages you to continue to develop your interests and give you that opportunity to be able to pursue whatever it is that you are envisioning for, whether it is to be able to deal with some type of issue that you have an idea about. This is a space. And so I chose this particular background because I know just recently we would have had the launch of the St Kitts Robotic Association, the St Kitts and Nevis, Robotic Association. And we've been in discussions with them here at the ICT Center to kind of make the hub their home, so where they'll have meetings. I know the ECCB have been playing a great role in encouraging that robotic association and looking at how we can have an OECS robotic association. And so I know there are some working together and collaboration as we move towards full digital economy within the OECS in particular, especially with the ECCB moving towards the digital cash. And I am looking forward to the launch of that. And so I thought this was the ideal background for what we're discussing today. And in hopes that it would just encourage persons to want to take that leap into the digital space, want to become more innovators, think of ideas that can help to transform their communities, transform different businesses. And so that is why I chose this background. But you were asking about...
Very appropriate, very appropriate.
I thought it would be, and I thought you would like the background too. So that's why we're here at this background. Just that encouragement, especially with us kicking off the OECS Robotic Association as well. But more specifically about the vision. As I've said earlier, the government of St Kitts and Nevis would have been on a quest to digital transformation since 2019. So we have a clear vision of this is what we want in terms of our digital transformation. And I'll just read it for you. It is to make St Kitts and Nevis a world leader in digital services delivery for citizens, residents, the private sector, and investors in a manner that is safe, efficient, interactive, and responsive to the needs of end users, and which would allow for economic growth and contribute to our national development. And so that is our overarching vision. From that vision, we are now at the point where just in January, we would have started with a session with our consultants to develop our whole of government IT strategy. And so meetings were had with all of our ministries and departments to find out where are you in terms of IT and how can we build out and make sure that once we do have digital transformation, it reaches and spans across the entire government public sector. Those meetings were already held. We understand the pain points, and now we're working towards a roadmap. And over the next 3 to 4 years, this is how we're going to grow our digital transformation. And this is the areas in which we're going to deal with within this year, in year 2, in year 3 and 4. Along with our digital transformation and whole of government strategy, we understand that cybersecurity will also be important, because now everything would be dependent on technology, and all of our government data would be stored within servers and the cloud and you name it. And so we have to protect that with everything. I remember when I interviewed for ECCB, I would have said in my interview that the most important resource that any institution have is their data. I was chastised when I said that, because they said, no, it's our human resource. But I wanted to get people to start thinking that it actually is the data, because our human resource can move, but our data have to remain intact. It must be credible, and it must have that confidence that whatever data that we have stored and are using is data that people can trust, and we can't afford to lose that. And so along with our digital strategy, we are also working in tandem with creating our cybersecurity policy as well, so that we make sure that once we have moved into a full digital economy, people can trust that the data of the government is safe. We can protect it from any type of cyber attacks. And so both are working hand in hand. We're also working on continuing our build out of our IT infrastructure in terms of our network capabilities. The government has a robust network infrastructure as we said, but we're just fine tuning that infrastructure to make sure that as we add on to our technology platforms, that the infrastructure is able to keep up with the demand that will be placed on it. And that's where our public and private partnership comes into play, because we are working closely with one of our telecommunications partners in St Kitts and Nevis in the cable, and they're assisting us with this rollout to ensure that fiber is everywhere within our infrastructure for government, and so that we're able to move data and information at speeds and allow us to be efficient once we move to that digital transformation. But their partnership with us isn't just about the government itself, but we're also looking at, once we have introduced all these new digital platforms for persons to be able to communicate back with the government, it means therefore that from home you should be able to have that type of level of access that assures efficiency once you're communicating back to government. And so again, with our partnership with the cable, they have done two things for us. They've committed to fiber to the home for all of their customers, as well as they're offering the government the opportunity to have free Wi-Fi in all of our community centers, which allows our residents to be able to, even if you don't have that direct access to your home, you'll be able to access the internet and use the services at our community centers. So that rollout have already begun. And we're also putting different government services within those community centers as well, so that it makes for easy access and persons have the ability to have that assistance once we roll out all of our digital platforms, once we move to a full transformation. Governor, you're so right. I am very passionate about this. I wrote a whole paper that was published on OpenU. Well, at that time, we were looking at costs, because we know at early stages, internet, anything with technology was expensive. And especially for our small Caribbean islands, it was a mammoth task. And so at that point, I was looking at how we can use open source to be able to deliver the e-government that would be required for us to move into the 21st century. But we're past that, and technology is a little bit more affordable. And so I am so happy to be in this position now, where I can be that champion for change and make sure that this digital transformation actually happens. And I must say that the team at the ICT Center, we have a cross-section of individuals who have been working very diligently and hard to make sure that we we are successful in rolling out digital transformation. So the vision is just for us to be able to truly be that world leader and just bring it back to the region. Even if in the region, we can be that leader for digital, a true digital economy where the government services are accessible at your fingertips. Because in St Kitts and Nevis in particular, we have so many other small businesses that have already developed, and I'm sure you know about the JAD Cash, where small businesses are able to accept payments by using an app on your phone. So even if you don't have the bank machine or you can't afford it, if you have access to this app, you can allow your customers to make payments to you using this JAD Cash. And I think that's a good way of introducing the idea of the digital cash as well. And in St. Kitts and Nevis as well, we have our 869 to go, where you could order your food online and have it delivered to your home. So we already have that mindset where people want to be able to access anything that the government offers digitally, because everywhere else in our private sector, we already have that push towards a digital access to whatever services is being offered within the private sector. And so I think we are a bit behind as a government, and persons are anxious now to see us move a lot of our government work into a digital platform. And so the acceptance on by the citizens themselves is going to, I believe, they are looking forward to it so that it would make it easier for us to have that acceptance. And I just wanted to share as well, as you know, you would have indicated that I am also the Minister of Health. And so one of the pilot ministries that we're working towards having as the first of the introduction to this idea of a digital space is the Ministry of Health, and we're introducing our health information system within our entire public health sector. And so by the end of the year, we're hoping that our institutional base, that is our hospitals in particular, will be completely digital. So once you come into the hospital, you have your unique medical ID that you can use to be able to have access to all the services that we provide within the institution. So you won't have to be coming back and sharing the same information. And it doesn't matter which doctor you would have to see within the public health system. All of your health record will be available to them just by the click of a button. And that is where we're taking our health system. On top of that, we're also looking at the Ministry of Finance, and we're trying to move all of our payment systems online as well. And we've already started that project as well. And so soon enough, if you need to pay your taxes, if you need to update your driver's license, those are already digital. But now we're going to move the entire, everything payment that you need to make within government will also be on a digital platform. And so we want to see that become a true reality in St. Kitts. And so we're really working hard towards achieving that. So we have a number of things working in tandem to get there. It'll start with a plan that would give us a clear process. But from that plan, we know that these are two ministries that we can use as our pilots to get us truly into that space of digital transformation, along with partnership with the private sector in terms of our relationship with the cable in particular. It would allow us to move a little bit faster in getting there, because we won't want to be left behind when the world begins to come out of the pandemic and we realize that much of the world now moves within a digital space. We want to make sure that St. Kitts and Nevis is already there as well.
Very good, very good. Minister, you covered several things, and of course I'm not going to attempt to rehash, but the issue of cybersecurity and building digital trust, really, really important for the digital economy. You spoke to that. The issue of supporting small businesses, and Christy made the point earlier that, you know, small businesses are the backbone of our economies. That is certainly true in most places, including the ECCU. In fact, at least 50% of all jobs in the ECCU are in or from small businesses. So enabling that sector is extremely important. And you also spoke about not bringing government online, but online government, the point Ms. Powell made earlier in the Bahamas. And again, very, very, very important. And the former financial secretary and now central banker, the value of how much government can save if we're able to do these things is just enormous. And we really want to wish you well as you shepherd this transition for the Federation and frankly the ECCU in its broader context. So I want to go back to David. And David, you mentioned taxation, you mentioned Universal Service Fund as areas where you think we could perhaps address. Any other thoughts on how this public-private partnership should work?
You asked me for three. I'll actually have four. First, we need to recognize that the issue of demand is critically important. We have an assumption, it's a reflexive position in government in the region that, everyone wants a broadband connection at their home, or all of our citizens sees the value of having a broadband connection at our homes. Just I think it was last week, I ran into somebody at a store and he was asking for he wanted to purchase something. It was an articulate gentleman, young man actually. I think he was trying to purchase something that he was looking for his children. And when he was told that it wasn't available at the store, I was standing behind him and I said, socially distanced, of course, try online. And he said, I don't have a computer. And I said, well, what about your phone? He said, I don't have a smartphone. And he said, I don't want one either. Now, you might think that that's peculiar, but there are far more people in our region who don't see the value of spending any money on having a broadband connection at their homes than we think they are. So the first issue we need to recognize is that governments need to address the issue of demand. And there are a few ways they can do that. They can do that by more aggressively focusing on ICTs in schools. We all know that the earlier young people get introduced to computers and to ICTs and to technology, the more likely they are to use it later on, the more comfortable they are with it, and the more comfortable they will be with using it in their daily lives as they get older for their normal transactions. So governments need to focus on that more aggressively. They also need to focus on reducing the cost of end devices. In the region, a number of our governments tend to, and I'm not saying that this isn't necessary in some cases, but a number of our governments tend to hand out end devices to communities at certain times. The problem is that's not a sustainable strategy if the people you're giving the computers to don't understand the value of it and don't recognize why it's important to take care of it. But by reducing the cost, in some of our countries, the cost of importing a smartphone or some computers or some technology in some cases remains relatively high. We can reduce that cost. And where people see the value of making those purchases, they will invest that money themselves and they are far more likely to appreciate that. So working on investment is important. Then I spoke about subsidization. There are some communities which, because of the low penetration of households, it just isn't economically feasible for companies to invest in fiber networks or high-speed broadband networks in those communities because they just wouldn't be able to recoup the revenue. But if governments were working with the private sector to provide subsidies to roll out high-speed networks in those communities, then they could lower the cost of spending the money on building out those networks, which is very expensive, and in that way ensure that those communities get some contributions. And then the other thing is, I spoke about taxation. We do need to have the right policies. And I'm talking about taxation in its broadest form. So we're looking at, for example, in terms of import duties, the industry faces incredibly high import duties. Almost 50% of all of the revenues that we pay to government comes from high import duties. But then there are also a number of other fees and taxes for operating. So we pay 30% corporate taxes, 30% of our revenues go toward government for taxes. Then we pay license fees, then we pay universal service fees, then we pay for spectrum fees, then we pay for numbering fees, and we pay a whole other range of fees. And all I mean to say by this is that raises the cost of operating in the region. And from the research that we've done, the Eastern Caribbean, this is particularly high. In other parts of the world, the tax burden on the industry is much lower, maybe somewhere in the region of maybe 20 to 25% in countries which have a much higher rate of penetration and where there's a greater level of performance. So with these sorts of policies that are, frankly, which make the cost of operating higher, it means the pace of investment in our countries will be lower. So we need to pay attention to those things. And so I think if we do those three things, and then the fourth thing is what the minister said, so many of our countries do not have our services online. Government is not properly online in too many of our countries. And that relates to demand. If we have more government services online, look, our citizens are already online. Our citizens have left our governments behind. Most of us are transacting our business, our banking business. We're purchasing things on Amazon. We are conducting our daily lives online. Government is the one that's behind us. So if government is able to catch up, that will also have a positive impact on demand. It will have a positive impact on investment, because companies will recognize that more and more people are using these services to get government services online. It's more critical to have that, to make those investments, because we know that people will use the services and will want to get the connectivity, because they can get their driver's license, in a rural community by just going online. They will begin to recognize the value of those connections now, whereas before or right now, they don't, because right today, they still have to leave the South in Dominica to travel to Roseau in order to get their passports, etc. So those four things: subsidization, working on demand, taxation, and digitization will make a huge difference to us in the region.
Right. Thank you very much, David, for those thoughts. I think we could agree with most of that. And certainly the issue of government is really important for building digital trust. So cybersecurity is one important aspect, but just people having more interface with government, which we all have to do, would help with building digital trust. So I fully agree with you on the need for government to do more and to go faster. And of course, we are behind as a region, and we should not kid ourselves about that. We are behind and we need to catch up. I will take one issue with you because there are critics who will say that the sector, in a different time, when it was perhaps making excess profits, did not invest sufficiently in infrastructure. How would you respond to that?
Governor, I'm not going to beat around the bush. There's plenty of blame to go around. I think companies have to accept that the pace of investment in some cases just hasn't been good enough, and wasn't good enough when the industry was in a different phase. The reality, and this is not an excuse, I'm just making what I think is a factual point. The reality, though, is that the industry is in a very structurally very different position than it was 20 years ago when liberalization was sweeping the region. The problem now is that a lot of the value that, a lot of the money that we are spending as citizens is flowing out of the region over these networks. Our money is being spent and going to companies like WhatsApp, to Facebook, to Amazon, to Netflix. That is where the money that we are working for is going, and it's going over our networks. The fact is that competition in the region is no longer between, say, the cable and Digicel or cable or wireless. Competition is between YouTube and cable and wireless, or WhatsApp and Digicel, or some other company, some other online company and another operator in BTC or in Bahamas. So competition is, the changes in technology have meant that competition have dramatically impacted the industry. The industry has less money available to it to reinvest. And the telecoms industry just isn't the cash cow that people think it is, because we have been hit hard, or used to be, because we have been hit hard by changes in technology. We need to recognize that. There's this reflexive assumption that telecoms companies have a huge amount of money at their disposal, but that just isn't the case. That may have been the case 20 years ago or before liberalization, when when there were monopoly operators. But today, telecoms companies are struggling to pay their debts. They have to go into more and more debt. Actually, similar to our countries, they have to go into a greater level of debt in order to fund their basic operations than they did, say, just 10 years ago, because of the way revenues are flowing out of the industry.
Yeah, no question about that. The landscape has changed. And it's, as you said, a very structurally very different operating environment now than it was 20 years ago. Thanks for that. And I mean, I hope you, thank you. I asked you a tough question. You gave me a straight answer, and I appreciate that. And I think the people of the region deserve no less. So thank you for that, David. We're going to have one more question. I'm going to pose to Ms. Powell. Christy, speak to our youth, our young people who are looking for opportunities. Wondering, what does the digital economy offer them? What are the potential possibilities or the real possibilities for our people? Just speak to them and speak to young people who are listening to us this morning.
Sure, absolutely. So when I look at the region, traditionally, like Mr. Cox would have actually mentioned in telecoms, there were lots of network engineers. And nowadays, the majority of what it is that we need are software developers to build the next generation web applications and mobile applications. And the truth is, the one solution that we need is to actually look at our universities. And I know that's a long-term game, but the reality is they're not just producing the individuals that we need that are going to be swept up by the job market who have the skills, because the curriculums are so outdated. And we suffer from it in the Bahamas, so I'm sure it's the same complex paradigm within the region. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do first. And what happens as a result of that is the public sector and the private sector continue to outsource software development to foreigners. And that frustrates a young person like me. So I'm sure all of the listeners, who are young, budding entrepreneurs are like, that grinds their gears when they think about it. Mm-hmm. Governments right now, when we listen to Minister Byron Nesbitt speak about the transformation that they're doing in the hospital industry, or what it is that they're looking to do in the Ministry of Finance with online payments, the region spends upward of $50 million a year on their infrastructure and software development, and that all goes outside. And I think one of the major opportunities right now on the horizon for young entrepreneurs is actually within the government, because governments within the region now are going to start looking at ways to hire more local talent and technologists, not only to save money, but to also spur that innovation within the agencies and the ministries. And that could be as simple as, how do we connect the Ministry of Finance to the Ministry of Health? How can we make sure that when someone walks in to get a booster shot for their child, that they're able to pay, through the Ministry of Finance's payment backbone? And so therein lies great opportunities for young people. The other thing I would say is that when young entrepreneurs right now are thinking about building applications for others, they may be thinking about, how do I build the next website, or how can I add an e-commerce platform to someone else's business? I would actually encourage them to think about problems that they want to solve. So Minister spoke about things that they're doing. I think it's called 869, or being able to order food within St Kitts. And not just thinking about, I want to bring Uber to the Bahamas or bring Uber to Barbados, but really pushing the boundaries of our imagination and understanding the social and cultural contexts that we have within our countries to actually solve problems. And then the last thing I would say is, when governments go out and even the private sector think about the latest technologies that they want to build or employ, I would encourage young people in the Caribbean to actually join forces together. What we're seeing right now is, when young entrepreneurs apply within the government, apply for the bidding process or the RFP process, they're often beat out by foreign companies. And it's because governments can't always assume the risk of working with a sole proprietorship when it comes to building out something that's going to sustain. And it disheartens and it weakens their spirits, because and I'm speaking from experience, right? Like it would flatten me as well. And so my words of advice there is to actually join forces with the person sitting next to you who's working in the Technology Innovation Hub, and don't see them as a threat, but actually join together so that you can rival the bigger companies that are out there that may be winning the bids. But there's truly a lot of opportunity. And I think for us, it's not always about, I know we always say it's access to funding. I actually don't think it's access to funding right now. I think the private sector needs to take a leap of faith with working with a young entrepreneur and trust that there is local talent that can actually produce the same thing that a foreigner can, and take the leap of faith within government to work with a young entrepreneur as well, and really build those public-private partnerships and grow that sector of the economy. So, and I think it's about again, it's not about the funding, it's about taking a risk on a young person. And I would encourage everyone working or listening on this call who has a next application that they would like to build to take a risk on that young person that they see there who's, interested in software development.
Thank you. Very, very interesting response. Two things that struck me there. We need to have a sense of imagination as a region. Sometimes that is our first biggest challenge. Mindset. We need to have a sense of imagination. And the other very powerful point you made, well, you made several, that resonated with me is this focus on indigenous talent. Indigenous talent. We're still looking too often to foreign when in fact we have indigenous talent who need an opportunity, who need a chance. And let's face it, some of us in our own professional lives, somebody took a chance on us as a young person. That's how we move forward. That's how that propelled us professionally. Speaking for myself, in my 20s, somebody decided, the Prime Minister of Grenada at the time, that I could serve as the financial secretary. Many people thought I was too young. And I merely make that example to show we got to give our young people a chance. So I want to underscore what you said there. If they're going to really be part of the digital economy, we have to give them a chance. And we have to give them support. I know Minister fully embraces that. In fact, on another program, which I haven't asked her about yet, we perhaps will talk about talent development, because that is an area that she has as a focus, talent and entrepreneurship, along with our ICT portfolio. So I just really want to underscore this point about supporting, trusting, and really helping our youth. Really, really important. They have to feel that they're part of this digital economy. There's something in it for them. There's something in it for them. And we don't want them to be going abroad continually, looking for opportunities. We have to build at home. So I fully endorse that. I got a little carried away there, but you could feel the passion as well. David, you wanted to come in? Please.
I just wanted to say it's a very profound point that we won't experience the real transformation we're looking for unless we change our mindsets, and there's a change in culture, which is at the moment just too risk averse. We do need to stop. We need to make a philosophical, there needs to be a paradigm shift in terms of our thinking. At the moment, a lot of our institutions are the way we approach banking, the way we approach lending, the way we look at capital is that, and from a policy point of view, our governments are still looking to attract the CEO from outside to come into the region to maybe have a home, to work from the region. And that's where our thinking is. We need to change that from trying to attract some CEO from some foreign land to trying to develop and create the environment for the next CEO to come from within. And once we make that transformative step, that the next great company can come from Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Jamaica, Bahamas, that the next great company can be built right here, then we will begin to recognize that the potential for us is unlimited. But while we continue to focus on attracting the next CEO from some great company to come in and invest, we will never achieve our real potential. And the way that we need to start doing that is we need to take a different approach to risk. We need to start, as you very well said, investing in local talent.
Right. Thank you.
If I can get...
Yes, please. Go ahead, Minister.
Yes, and I was so happy when Ms. Powell made that point, because as part of the efforts here as well, I know when I got into the Ministry of ICT, there is an e-government unit, which is a team of young persons who are programmers, and they felt as if their work was not being recognized. And so we've been and they made the same point that they're capable of building the applications that persons are being asked to come in and build for the government. Mm-hmm. And so we are making a complete shift within the ministry so that the other ministries and departments understand that we have that talent right here in the Ministry of ICTs. And so even as we have been going through the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been using this team within our e-government units and this team of young persons. They built out KNA travel forms Anybody who wants to come into St. Kitts now, you go online and you fill out your immigration, your health checks, and your customs form. It was all built internally here by that team of very young people. They're building our database to keep track of our COVID-19 vaccination rollout plan. So where you go to make your appointments and where you go to be able to enter the information on any of the we do not use the technical terms, but where people go into to report their side effects so that we can keep track of that information. That is also being built by the team here. And so we're making that shift so persons can realize we really don't need to be spending the money on persons from outside because that talent is here. So right now we're using our e-government unit in particular to show that we have that talent here and we can use the talent that we have here. And we don't need to be spending as much money on persons from the outside to do the work that they're so capable of doing. And now everybody around the world is using the KNA travel form. So we are confident now our e-government unit can deliver. And as a result, they have been getting requests from all the other ministries, police in particular as well, have been using their services more. But before that, the government have been collaborating with a young team, Open Interactive, and some of the earlier websites as well as applications that were built for the government was built by that team. It's a team of young persons. They were given the opportunity to come and present their ideas on how they can help the government. And then they were given that chance to build applications. And that is what we try to foster in St. Kitts. And yes, that will also be part of the new ministry initiative, but within the Department of Technology. And as we do the rollout of digital transformation, we're looking within the government itself and within St. Kitts and Nevis, because we know we have persons who are more than capable. And just like Ms. Powell, I was a programmer at one point, and so it pained me as well that we were not using the talent that we had here and persons weren't thinking that we were capable. And so now we're just making sure we give other young persons that push. If we're going to encourage you to be innovators, then we have to take that risk on you. And we're willing to take that risk with our young persons to give them that opportunity to prove themselves. And so far, they have been proving themselves to be just as good as anybody else.
Very, very, very good, Minister. Very good. And by the way, you were an excellent programmer at ECCB. Sorry, I had to say that because that is a fact. You have been missed. But I'll move on. So here it is. We've just completed the first segment of our discussion. And as you could see the passion from our panelists, I want to thank them very much for their responses. And just to say, for those of you who may have joined since we started, you are listening to ECCB Digital Dialogues. Our focus today is Pandemic and Digital Transformation Part 2. I want to acknowledge our partner radio stations who are carrying this broadcast. In Anguilla, Radio Anguilla, Class FM Radio, and Cool FM Radio. In Antigua and Barbuda, Nice FM. The Commonwealth of Dominica, Q95 and Carry FM. In Grenada, We FM Radio, Classic FM, and Sister Isles Radio, which is in Carriacou. Montserrat, Radio Montserrat, ZJB. In St Kitts and Nevis, ZIZ TV, and Freedom FM, which is radio. St. Lucia, Rhythm FM, and WVent. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, NBC Radio, Praise FM Radio, and We FM Radio. For rebroadcast, in Dominica, we will have DBS Radio, which will do a broadcast on the 2nd of March between 10 and 11:30 a.m. And in St. Kitts and Nevis, we will have Vaughan Radio, which will do a broadcast of this tomorrow, February 26th at 8 a.m. And WINN FM will do it this afternoon at 4 p.m. So again, I want to just acknowledge and thank our partner television and radio stations who are taking this broadcast and bringing it to our people across the region. So now we'll pivot to the poll and let us check in and see where we are. Again, if you just joined us, we've opened the poll. We opened it from the beginning. It's www.menti.com. The code is 6781897. I repeat, 6781897. We have 4 questions. Let's check in and see how we're going. Question number 1. Which sector of our region's economy is in greatest need of digital transformation? Which sector of our economy is in greatest need of digital transformation? And overwhelmingly, 57% of respondents have said public administration, which is government. 17% agriculture, 13% education, 13% health. But the overwhelming majority, now 60%, are indicating that the area of greatest need of digital transformation is government. I don't think we're shocked by this result, but I think it just underscores the real need and possibilities for our government if we really move forward. And of course, we heard from Minister, we also heard from Ms. Powell about what the governments are doing and need to be doing. And even Mr. Cox, who also endorsed the need for government to do more. Very good. That number has risen to 66%. So we'll leave that there. The message is clear. Government needs to make the biggest move where digital transformation is concerned. That is not to say the other sectors are not important, but clearly government should lead. And in a sense, you could argue government could also include education and health in a manner of speaking. So there again, government sort of has a 2 or 3 bites at the cherry, as it were. Very important. Thank you. Let's go to question number 2. The second question says, what do you see as the most critical reform needed in our education system to support digital transformation of our economies? What do you see as the most critical reform needed in our education system to support the digital transformation of our economies? And so far, what we can tell is that the first one is employing modern digital technologies in teaching and learning. So I suppose that's education and learning. That has 44% of the votes as we speak. And then the other area that has 34% is focusing on teaching the 6 C's for the 21st century. And the 6 C's are collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, content, confidence, communication. Those are the 6 C's. I think Brookings Institute may have coined that in a paper article that it wrote for earlier this year. The 6 C's for education in the 21st century: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, content, and confidence. And according to this poll, 32% believe that that is the area government should that it should be focused on, but 44% actually indicate that we need to focus on teaching and learning, more use of digital technologies in teaching and learning. I made a point in an address I did in a graduation a couple months ago, and I was speaking of the experience I had in Singapore, and with an 18-year-old who was telling me about the government asking him to engage in relearning and reskilling. And I was making the point that the children of Singapore do not have better brains than the children of the ECCU. They're only better trained. And part of that is, of course, the teacher quality, but it's also the use of technologies and so on. They don't have better brains, but they're better trained. And I gave an example because Singapore is the size of Dominica. So there's a lot we can learn from Singapore as well. Let's move to the third question. The third question is, what concerns you most as we move forward with digital transformation of our region? What concerns you most as we move forward with the digital transformation of our region? 46% of respondents say connectivity, and that includes speed, cost, and reliability. 41%. It keeps moving as more and more people vote. But 44% say connectivity. 30% say cybersecurity, and Minister touched on that. And 26% say digital illiteracy. Digital illiteracy insufficient knowledge, and maybe in some cases, lack of interest or insufficient interest in digital tools. So 44% connectivity, 32% it's cybersecurity, and about 23% it's digital illiteracy. What concerns you most as you move forward the digital transformation? Connectivity, followed by cybersecurity, followed by digital illiteracy. Let's move to our fourth and final question. What type of digital transformation is most important for private sector firms in our region to undertake? What type of digital transformation is most important for private sector firms in our region to undertake? And 57% of respondents say transformation of their business processes. Their business processes. 24% say transformation of their business models. Their business models. Only 6% say transform the domain in which they operate. And 15% say transformation of organizational culture. Transformation of organizational culture. So again, what we see here is that the majority of respondents feel that businesses need to transform their processes. And about a third believe that businesses need to transform their business models. So in some cases, what that is saying is that the business model may be appropriate, but your business processes are opaque, antiquated, outdated, irrelevant, painful, and you need to re-engineer the business processes. And that's the same for government as well, by the way. So it's not just the private sector. Thank you very much for those responses. That ends our poll segment. And so now we want to go to the questions and answer segment. And the first question we have on screen is from Facebook. Is there a monitoring system in place that computers that are being used for the purpose and everyone is internet ready? I'm not sure I got that. Is there a monitoring mechanism or system in place that the computers that are being used for the purpose and that everyone is on in? All right, sorry about that. There's something missing in that question. Let's move on. We have to come back if I could get that sorted. Somebody is asking, let's go down. Why does a customer still have to pay his or her bill when we do not have stable internet and are not getting the bandwidth we are paying for? Why does a customer still have to pay his or her bill when we are not getting stable internet and not getting the bandwidth we paid for? I kind of touched on that a little earlier. David, I suppose, what would you say on that?
Yeah, I think the customer is right. I mean, I think if you have a bad connection and you're not getting the service consistently, then you do need to contact your provider and file make a complaint. They typically have a process, and a good provider, if they can verify your issue, should provide you with some relief on your bill. I absolutely agree. One thing that I will say, though, Governor, which is important for the public to understand, is that we need, as community, that is all stakeholders and operators especially, need to do a lot more to educate the public about the internet and the internet usage. A number of us equate Wi-Fi with internet connectivity when the two things are related, but they're actually separate, they're distinct. We have, up and down the Caribbean, in my role as head of regulatory affairs for cable and wireless, I see customer complaints to regulators across the region, from Cayman Islands down, and some customers will write into a regulator to say, I'm not getting the speed that I bargained for. There's a problem with my connection, and then when an investigation is done, we are able to determine that at the point at which your internet connection enters your home, you're actually getting the same speed that you bargained for or higher. But that in some cases, the customer has so many devices on the network and they are connected to the network via Wi-Fi that it causes a poor experience. So for example, if you are in a household where there are 3 or 4 people who are using, computers, a laptop, a smartphone, and a tablet, somebody's downloading Netflix at the same time that a child is on, or streaming Netflix at the same time a child is on screen, doing online learning. If you only have 10 megabits of speed and you're doing all of that on the network all at once, you're not going to have a very good experience. And that isn't because of the connection you have. That isn't the problem with the operator. That's because you don't have the right level of bandwidth for your needs. That's one issue. In some cases, we have customers who are just, as I say, it's a Wi-Fi issue. They're getting a poor connection in one room, whereas their router is located in a different area. So there can be a whole range of problems that impact our experience that are not operator related. And that isn't to say that there aren't problems with us as operators. I'm not trying to minimize that at all. I'm simply trying to point out that the issues sometimes are very complex. But the bottom line is, as a customer, if you're paying for a service and you're not getting that service in a consistent way, you should have the right to go to your provider and say, I haven't received this service for 6 days out of the month or 2 weeks out of the month. They should be able to check that and verify that that's the case. And that provider ought to recognize that in your bill.
Right. So David, thank you for that, because I think that's a huge issue for many customers. What you said there is consumer protection so that they get value for money, but also consumer education so that we understand the use of our bandwidth, what it can and cannot do. And you gave a very good example with Netflix competing with online learning, because that is happening in our region right now. Minister, you wanted to comment on that?
Yes,
Please
indeed, because he would have touched on it from the telecommunication company side of things, but from a regulatory side of things as well, I wanted to just touch on the fact that I know many persons within the ECCU. We have about 5 member states that are part of ECTEL. ECTEL has 5 countries who have signed on and agreed to share the responsibilities of telecommunication and regulating our telecommunication space. They do that through our local NTRCs. And I just wanted to add so that persons are aware as well, because I know that connection is an issue. Yes, you are right. In some instances, it's just about how much you are purchasing versus what you're trying to do on the network. But we do have issues where persons are unable to connect. And that's what the NTRC is there for as well, is to regulate. And so if customers find that they're not able to get the type of connection that they are paying for, you've reported it to the agent, the company, numerous times, and you're not getting the satisfaction, the NTRC can also assist, and you can also make that report to the NTRC, who would also do their investigations and ensure that you are, as a customer, getting what you are paying for, and you will have some type of reprieve in terms of any issues that you may have. So I just wanted to add that, because I thought it was important that people know that option is available, and that is what our NTRCs are there to assist with as well.
Right. Thank you, Minister. So NTRCs, National Telecoms Regulatory Commissions, we have in Grenada, we have in St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica, and St. Kitts and Nevis. I believe those are the 5. So if you're calling your provider and you're not getting anywhere, call your NTRC is the point.
Governor,
they might be able to make an intervention for you. David, go ahead.
I just wanted to add a very quick point. The minister is very correct, and I'm grateful for her for raising that. And as a former general counsel of ECTEL myself, I can certainly speak to the role that regulation plays in helping to protect customers and also trying to prompt operators to provide the best possible service in a country. I want to just want to make one sort of overarching point, which I think is critically important, because we are talking with you, with the ECCB, and it's a point about regulation, about getting the right balance of regulation. It's critically important, in all of those issues I spoke about earlier, about taxation, encouraging demand, etc. We need to get the right balance of policies in place to encourage investment. If regulation is too bureaucratic, if it is too rules-based and too rigid, if it is not appropriate for the market, we will not only experience a greater reduction in the level of investment and capital we see coming into the region in telecoms, but we actually will end up with a worse experience for the customer. So it's very, very important that we get the right balance of regulation right. And that's why I favor a collaborative approach, and why conversation between the private sector and regulatory authorities and also, government is critically important to understand what is the right level of regulation for a market at a particular point in time. And that's not specific to, the ECTEL states or St Kitts. It's just a general point that we need to think very carefully about, because if we get the balance of regulation wrong, we actually will do more harm to the market and to our customers ultimately than benefit them.
Right, and as a regulator, I take that point. And I will say of our sister regulator, ECTEL, that under the Caribbean Digital Transformation Program funded by the World Bank project, which we featured in our first in this series on digital transformation, there will be upgrades. I know I can speak for Mr. Millett when I say that, because he's working now with his team. There will be upgrades on the regulatory side. So I hope those will assist the industry in supporting some of the things, being more responsive, better coverage. We accept the regulator has to improve. ECCB has to improve in the same way ECTEL has to improve. We all have to keep raising our game. So your point is made, and the need for the mix, the right balance is taken. There's a question on roaming, and I'd like both Minister and Mr. Cox to address that. And the question is, there was some promise at the level of the CARICOM heads that they will be moving to some kind of, as part of the ICT space, I suppose, single ICT space, moving towards the abolition or elimination of roaming fees within the CARICOM area to make telecoms more affordable and more accessible. Where are we on that? Minister, do you want to come in first, if you wish?
Sure, that's not a problem, yes. There is that talk about roaming and how do we address the issue within our space. And if I can go back again to ECTEL, because that is the 5 contracting states are governed by the treaty that was put in place by ECTEL. And this is something that ECTEL is trying to address with the introduction of the new electronic communications bill. Here in St Kitts and Nevis, we would have been the first of the 5 states to pass that bill in our National Assembly just last week. And so what it is being able to address just that. How do we treat with roaming across the space so that it is considered to be a one space, especially within the ECTEL context of things and the NTRC context of things. And so it's about getting everybody on board, all the countries on board, getting the telecommunication companies on board as well. And just as Mr. Cox would have indicated, it's about having that conversation between the regulators and the telecommunication agencies. But what I can say is leading up to the introduction of the EC bill, ECTEL would have had quite a number of engagements with the telecommunications agents to tell them of the changes that the new EC bill will put in place once we have passed it within all of our 5 member states. And so that side, I just want to go back to that idea of being able to have that balance between the regulator and the companies that have been happening from ECTEL ends of things, and they have been having those consultations since about 2009, now to the point where we're ready to introduce the electronic communications bill so that everybody's at the same place. In St Kitts and Nevis, I said we will pass it recently, and our NTRC is engaging the telecommunication companies so that they can get an idea of this is what this bill means to you. This is how this bill will work within our territory and within our space. And that does include roaming and understanding that once you move through the contracting states, it should be a matter of being able to roam freely.
Right. Thank you, Minister. I'm so disappointed to say that we're out of time. I would wish we could have had another 30 minutes to take more questions because there are a few still. But we are unable to continue with the questions at this moment. We may need to have another session to deal with some of those. So let me ask the panelists to give a 1-minute closing remark, if you will. I'll start with Ms. Powell. Christy, what say you?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would, definitely want to leave and impress upon the young entrepreneurs and young people in the community is just to continue to persevere. And I do think that there's opportunity, specifically, like I mentioned, just having the role that I have now within government. So continue to knock on the doors of Minister Byron Nesbitt, and the governor yourself. And at some point they will listen, even if you have to just stage a sit-in. And I would encourage you to do that because the time is ours. And I think it's very, very important for the public sector and the private sector to take a risk on us.
There you have it, the words of an inspiring and militant Ms. Powell. Thank you for that. Perseverance pays. I agree with you on that. Thank you for that. David, what say you?
Governor, it's been an absolute pleasure. Let me thank you. Let me thank my fellow panelists. I'm deeply honored to have been on a panel with such amazing women and leaders in the ICT field, the minister and Ms. Powell. Just a pleasure. And I hope we can continue the dialogue. I want to quickly end by saying, Governor, I think that these conversations are critically important. I'm very grateful to you for including the private sector in the discussion. Too much of the discussion in the region is within the public sphere. It's not engaging the private sector enough, and we need to do that. I see a disconnect, Governor, that we need to address. And the disconnect is between the public and private spheres on a few things. It's between the ends we want and the means that we want to achieve them. I mean, roaming is an example of that. The companies want to help the governments achieve their dreams and their objective of that single space, but there are some structural impediments that we need to talk about in order to get there, and not enough time is being spent to try to overcome those issues, because they are real. They do impact our ability to do so. But it's also affecting us in the discussion on bridging the digital divide. There are some structural impediments to making sure that capital gets into the countries, and we need to have an honest conversation about that. And then finally, there is a need for us as parties to think about. I think as operators, we need to, and perhaps the ECCB can help us with that. We need to persuade the governments that they really can rely on ICTs to bring about the economic growth they're looking for. Because I think sometimes there's a disconnect between what governments say they want ICTs to do, but they're not following through on their policies. And I think if we can provide that reassurance that they will see the benefits, they will reap the dividends, then we will see a change in policy. So I think a deeper conversation with the ECCB going forward, that's based on data, that's based on research, that can give our ministers of finance in particular the reassurance that, look, if you make this investment in ICTs, you will see this benefit in your, in the consolidated funds. It's as basic as that. I think we'll see some movement. So, Governor, thank you very much. And Minister Byron and Christy, it's just an absolute pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, David. And I'll follow up with you. Our research team would be very interested in that collaboration. So we'll follow up offline. Thanks for that offer. Minister, Madam Minister.
Thank you very much, Governor, and thank you again for having me as part of the panel. It was a pleasure being part of a panel with Ms. Powell and Mr. Cox. I definitely enjoyed the time that we spent speaking about the pandemic and digital transformation. And I just wanted to end where you started, in the sense that we have to begin to see broadband access and internet just the way we see water and electricity. And I understand that we would have to change our policies within government. So just like the building board, you need to have certain things in place in order to make sure the basic of water and electricity is provided to a home. Same thing, we need to see that same push in order to have broadband being available to the home as well. So that means that we have to make sure our legislative and policy and regulations all play a part in seeing the digital transformation and being able to see this become a reality. Because in the future, and the future is already here, the internet and access to the internet is just as important in our day and age as water and electricity. And so it's important for us to see that. In St Kitts and Nevis, we're talking about a 90% internet penetration, which tells you that internet is just as important as water and electricity. All the tools that we have in IT, that's how we have to look at it, tools. And so how can we use these tools to better enhance our positions in life, or situations, or education, or whatever it is? Use the tools wisely in order to be able to get the outcomes that you desire. And it will be part of what you need to learn and how to use it in order to be able to interact with the future of government, the future of any economy worldwide. And so I just want to encourage persons, just as Ms. Powell said, especially the young persons in particular, start thinking about how you can progress yourselves in IT. What do you have to do to get your foot in the door? Yes, and I would encourage them to come and speak with me, because I always encourage that, and see how we can help you get yourself started in IT and how you can be one of the service providers when the government moves towards a digital transformation, because it's going to be an all of society approach in order to get us there. And we know we have a lot of young, talented individuals who are more than capable of building that next best application that will be able to serve our government and people. And so I'm looking forward to see those individuals step forward and be part of this whole digital transformation. But from my end, on a policy level, I will make sure that we get the internet and broadband to be just as important when you're building a home as you have for water and electricity. And that's my small closing remarks.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you mentioned the all of society approach, and I know that has worked very well for the Federation in respect of controlling the pandemic, the containment, and I have no doubt it will work very well for digital transformation, all of society approach. So fully endorse that. I just wish we had a few more minutes to keep engaging on this subject, but our time is up. So let me thank all of our viewers and listeners, wherever you've joined us, for participating today. I want to thank our partner radio and television stations, again, for continuing this collaboration. I thank my colleagues who have supported this broadcast, including Dr. Emma Foss-Sowador, Shermalan Kirby, Monique Franks, Marlon Bristol, Marlon Davis, Shana Daniel, Karina Phillips Somersall, Alston Crawford, and my colleagues on the Mentimeter. Who's on the Mentimeter today? Lyndon Jacasel, and on Facebook, Elizabeth Whalen, all of the ECCB team. Thank you so much, colleagues. I'm so proud of you for all your hard work throughout this pandemic. Thank you for your support today. My final remarks are simply something I say all the time because I truly believe it. As a region, we cannot change our history. We cannot change our geography, but we can change our development trajectory through collective action and the adoption of digital technologies. I truly believe that. That is why we're on this quest for transformation of our region, and that is why digital transformation is a critical component of that process. Again, my thanks to our panelists, Madam Minister Akilen Byron Nisbet, Mr. David Cox, and Ms. Kirsty Powell. Our gratitude to you and to all of our viewers and listeners. Thank you, stay safe, and stay connected and engaged.
There you had it, folks. Another edition of the ECCB Digital Dialogues here on WINN FM 98.9. We now head back to our regular program. Don't forget at 6 o'clock we got the WINN FM News and Sports package.